Hi there! So this video is a bit special, because 2 weeks ago I had no idea that I would make such a video. As you might know, during last summer I started a project video series in which I not only set up a board greenhouse in my garden, but also automated it. I measured the temperature and humidity inside it and sent this data to a LoRa gateway in my apartment 300 meters away, which then published the data on the internet. I also created a motorized window opener for the system. And to finish this video series off, I actually started production on part 3 about a month ago. The only problem was that while finishing the new electrical and mechanical system in my apartment, a big storm hit Germany, which turned my board greenhouse into a kite and pretty much destroyed its aluminum frame while landing. So that basically means I got a new LoRa system ready for installation and plans that desperately want to live in a greenhouse, but no longer a greenhouse. And that is why in this episode of DIY or Buy, I will show you how I built a new and really sturdy DIY greenhouse over the course of 5 days, that you can easily build as well. This way we can find out whether it makes sense to DIY such a greenhouse, or whether we should stick to the commercial solution instead, like I did before. Let's get started! This video is sponsored by JLC PCB. Feel free to visit their website jlcpcb.com to not only find out what awesome PCB and assembly services they offer, but also to easily upload your Gerber files and thus order affordable and high quality PCBs quickly. First off, let me tell you that while reusing the aluminum frame was not possible, it was certainly possible to reuse the twin wall sheets, which I did. But just to be on the safe side, I ordered another package of them, which in hindsight was mandatory, since my new greenhouse is a bit bigger than the old one. And that brings me to the 3 kinds of timber I used for this build. For the lower main foundation, I used 90 by 90 by 1850 mm long posts. For the main roof foundation, I used 30 by 60 by 2000 mm long square timber. And for the rest, I used pretty common 24 by 48 by 2000 roof batten. Then we also used lots of different kinds of screws, metal brackets, hinges and so on, of which you should definitely make a list like I did before starting such a project. And when it comes to tools, then there's quite a bit that you will need too. But most importantly, I would recommend having a chainsaw for quickly cutting the big posts, a jigsaw to cut everything else, an electric drill to get all the screws into place, and a big spirit level in order to constantly check whether everything is level, obviously. And with the introduction out of the way, we started day 1 by hammering one of the 6 ground sleeves I bought into the earth. These ground sleeves, with their length of 90 cm, will not only prevent the greenhouse from becoming a kite once again, but they will also lift the wood construction up a bit. I did this because the soil in my garden is always moist, which would have rotted the wood quicker. But anyway, after using another post to determine the distance to the next sleeve, we hammered that one into place while making sure that both sleeves were level to one another. Then we marked a height of 130 cm onto both upright posts, at which we cut them with the chainsaw. By the way, this height will allow the twin walls to be mounted to the pillars. So next we drilled the holes into the poles before we permanently mounted them inside the sleeves. Afterwards, we positioned another post between them while making sure that everything was level, and secured it in place with 2 metal brackets and screws. For the upper remaining pole, however, we firstly mounted the metal brackets in position before adding the pole. And just like that, we got a lovely wooden square, to which we secured a rope in order to get the alignment right for the next 2 ground sleeves. You see, by making sure that the rope leaves in parallel to the already existing posts, we can create a perfect orientation line that we obviously used in order to position the 3rd and 4th ground sleeve. And by the way, while the length of the front and back side was limited by the dimension of 1 pole, we decided on a length of 380 cm for the longer sides, which basically told us where to position the middle ground sleeve. Now, just like before, we cut the pillars to size, secured them to the sleeves, and then added metal brackets and finally the lower and upper between posts. But let me tell you that while doing so, we also used pretty basic wood stain in order to protect the timber from UV radiation. Okay, to finish the foundation of this greenhouse, we used the rope trick once again, but this time with a corner, in order to determine the position for the remaining 2 ground sleeves. And just like before, we cut the timber and secured them in place with tons of screws and metal brackets in order to get the main structure done by the end of the first day. Now, we started off the second day by adding a temporary lath between 2 posts to get them correctly into position for the roof, which was surprisingly easy to figure out how to do. Since we know that the base side of the roof is 203.5 cm long, because we actually measured it, and that we got an angle of 45 degrees here, we can use some simple math to get a length of 143.9 cm for the roof sides. So we cut those required pieces from the bigger square timber with a 45-degree angle and secured 2 of them to the front side of the greenhouse. To keep them in place, we used a 90-degree brackets for the upper corner and 2 135-degree brackets for the connection with the main structure. Then we pretty much repeated this process for the back of the greenhouse and the middle section. Next, we measured the distance between the 3 roof triangles, cut the necessary roof batten to size, and secured them to the roof in order to form a low, middle and high mounting line. And that basically ends day 2, which brings me to day 3, in which I started by marking the 70 cm door onto a front pillar. Then I also marked the position of additional supporting roof battens all around the greenhouse, which should preferably get positioned 60 cm apart from one another, so that we can later easily secure the twin walls to them, which are coincidentally 60 cm wide. Next, I measured the length of those required laths, cut them with the jigsaw and positioned them all around the greenhouse before I finally secured them in place with more metal brackets and screws. As soon as that was done, I created more supporting laths for the roof, which I mounted to the front and back side of the greenhouse's roof. And I should not forget to mention that I also added a smaller piece of wood at a height of 150 cm to the front of the greenhouse, which will act as the upper limit for the door, for which I used a big piece of plywood that I salvaged from a very old project in which I built an LED bar, so feel free to check that video out for nostalgia. But anyway, before cutting this plywood, I had to remove a big piece of the front upper pillar in order to easily enter the greenhouse, and that is where things went a bit wrong. Not only am I apparently terrible at using a chainsaw, but I later also cut the plywood incorrectly and thus had to create such a Frankenstein door out of 2 smaller pieces. But nevertheless, after adding a supporting piece of wood to the lower front posts, I secured 2 hinges to the door construction, lifted the plywood door into place, added a lock to hold it there, and mounted it to the 2 hinges through the help of M5 screws and nuts. And just like that, I ended day 3 with a functioning door. For day 4, I started with unwrapping the twin wall sheets, which will be the main focus of the remaining 2 days. To mainly mount them to the woods, I use such Tackerkrallen, which I from now on will only call clips. By widening them a bit, they can snugly hold the 4mm thick sheets, and thus I only had to secure them to the main wood frame with screws, get the sheets in place and add even more of them. Of course, sometimes I had to create a custom sheet size, but that was super easy to do with a simple box cutter. So all in all, there's not much to say about the process of adding the twin wall sheets all around the greenhouse. Now the roof, however, was a bit more difficult, since the sheets had no mounting laths on the top side yet, which is why we firstly cut more roof batten in order to create such a mounting line. Before using that line though, we filled up the empty space between the lines with more wood and then secured the sheets to the roof with the clips. But for the lower side attachments, we had no other choice than to use some screws with big washers, which will hopefully keep the water out. And we basically continued the roofing until day 4 was over. On the 5th and final day, I cut the remaining sheets for the first roof part and secured them in place just like I described it before. Next, to prevent water from entering through the roof, we used aluminium tape in order to cover the gap between all the roof sheets. And finally, after that was done, it was time to mount the smaller remaining twin wall sheets I had laying around to the top of the roof, which was not only very hard to reach, but sometimes we also had to improvise a bit in order to get a nice pointy roof tip. And just like that, after a lot of hassle, the roof was finally complete. So we continued by creating a couple of special shapes of the sheets in order to cover the remaining holes of the greenhouse. Last but not least, I created rather small strips of the sheets in order to cover the space between the lower posts of the greenhouse and the earth. And with that process being completed, the greenhouse was basically done. More or less at least. A proper aluminium ledge for the roof tip is missing, as well as some aluminium tape for the roof. And not to forget 2 windows. But I will talk about all of that during the last parts of my greenhouse automation video series. But so far I'm quite happy with this DIY version, which is not only more spacious, but you can also more easily add your own modifications, which I definitely encourage you to do if you want to build something similar. Now when it comes to the price, then the DIY version was in my case a bit more expensive than the buy version. And of course you will have to invest more time into it. But since I really like the look and feel of a DIY greenhouse, I will have to say that it is a tie this time. And depending on what you're looking for, DIY or buy can be the winner for you. But what do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe and hit the notification bell to not miss the next episode about this greenhouse. Stay creative and I will see you next time!